Welcome to Electric Evolution with Liz Allan. This podcast is about the journey to a more sustainable future in order for us to be able to do our bit to achieve net zero. I'll be discussing a variety of topics with experts in their field in order to educate and increase our knowledge of clean energy, electric vehicles and the electric vehicle infrastructure. So whether you're an individual wanting to make a difference at home, a small business or a corporate, this podcast is just for you. So today I have Vicky Edmonds with me, and she's the CEO of EVA England, and she started in January this year. Vicky, it's so brilliant to have you on here. Thank you ever so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So, and I know you've already been on another podcast with one of my podcast friends already, haven't you?
I have indeed.
But I want to get a bit of a lowdown on you, and as I kind of said before we started recording, it's always good to kind of get a little bit of your background. So tell us a little bit about what you did before EVA England, because you've been in government or working in policy for some time, haven't you? Give us a little bit of that background, if you will.
Indeed, I've been in the policy world for almost 20 years now. So I started in government back in the mid-2000s, the first decade of the 2000s, as a civil servant. And I've spent the last, decade working on transport decarbonisation policy. So not just electric vehicles, but aviation decarbonisation, air quality as well, so wider emissions, and a little bit around shipping. So have a sort of a good portfolio of across the modes of transport. But electric vehicles is definitely, I think, the home for me. So I spent 3 years as one of the joint heads of what was then OLEV, the Office for Low Emission Vehicles, with Natasha Robinson, who I'm sure many of your listeners also know. And then I also spent 18 months as an EV advisor to the Energy Systems Catapult, to their board, helping them integrate electric vehicles into their energy modelling, because obviously electric vehicles is so central to the energy system. The board of EVA England almost 2 years ago now, as an EV driver and a policy specialist, and then jumped across to become Chief Executive of EVA England in January.
And congratulations. I should have said that to start off with. Congratulations. This is brilliant. I mean, I spoke to James Court on here previously, but it's just nice to kind of see you coming in, and he's moved on now to, it's Octopus Electric Vehicles, isn't he, now doing some policy over there. But let's talk a little bit about kind of what excites you about what's going on, and we'll talk about the ZEV mandate as well in a few minutes. But what excites you about this role and the change in kind of moving into it?
So I'll start. So I think I'm an EV driver as well as an EV policy expert, and I think when you're so embedded in a sector like us EV drivers are, you just have a real passion for it. And I think that's why throughout my career I kept coming back to electric cars. So for me, having been on the inside of government, putting in place the original 2030 ambition for phasing out combustion cars, and then being on the outside and being a driver who is now one of the people helping us to meet that ambition, helping drivers understand the sector, helping drivers enjoy their experiences with their electric cars, for me is a really nice kind of coming full circle in the EV world for me. So having developed the policy and then implemented it and now actually living it is a really nice thing. And I'm very passionate about helping people get into their cars and enjoying them.
Because we've just been talking as well about a little post that came out on Sky News today.
Yes, indeed.
Which is slightly perturbing, where it actually said, and I think it was a bit of a clickbaity headline. I don't know whether you thought that, but one of the stats in there were that more than 1 in 5 people out of the AA members that they polled would not choose an electric vehicle. What do you think?
So I'm not panicked about that yet. So I mean we've spoken a bit about EVA England. So we run surveys regularly of our members, but also wider driver surveys. And one of the biggest barriers to EV uptake is misinformation and miscommunication of what the sector is about and what these cars are about. I also think from a personal experience, taking the leap from a combustion engine car to an electric car, if you don't know anything about them, is quite a leap of faith still. So it
Yeah.
took me a long time to persuade my husband that no, we were not going to get a plug-in hybrid. We were going to go full electric. And yes, these cars do work and they're wonderful, and we did. And obviously we've never looked back, or he's never looked back. But I think it's still a leap of faith if you've been in a world where you're used to petrol pumps and a particular way of driving behaviour. And so I'm not too panicked about reports that come out like that. And it's actually consistent with some data that Persuasion UK and IPPR did recently, where they showed that, most voters are really positive about electric cars, but they just don't know if they will fit into their lifestyle. And I think for those of us in the sort of trade body policy world, we need to meet that challenge of showing people that they do work, that they can work for them in their lifestyle, and try to tackle that misinformation and miscommunication barrier. And one of the easiest ways is just the number of EV drivers increasing and people seeing that they work, people talking about it, that sort of communication, friends and family. Schoolgate, we talked about that earlier, is a really powerful place for the spread of kind of positive information about EVs, but just showing people that they work and just continuing to get those positive messages out. So I'm optimistic that as the sector grows, that those views will dissipate, but we do need to keep on it, and we do need to help people understand the cars.
I mean, and I was going to say, I still think, and I've written quite a lot about this lately, that we've got complicated terminology. We've got to counter the misinformation. I think the complicated terminology, like rapids, ultra rapid, CCS, CHAdeMO, all of this kind of stuff, that kind of, like you just said, it blows your mind. I kind of took it in really, really quickly, but not everybody's going to put up with all of that, are they? So to me, it's about simplifying the terminology and getting the comms right.
Yeah, absolutely. I was talking about this the other day. I think people assume, I think those in the EV sector are such enthusiasts about the sector, and they know everything there is to know about these, what are effectively new pieces of technology, but they are new and they are different, and trying to help people understand them is really important. And when we talk to our members who are really enthusiastic about their electric cars, but they tell us about how they have friends who just, especially sort of people who are elderly, they just can't make the leap, because it's, for them, the whole world of iPads and iPhones is hard enough, and then you've got a car that has a screen in it and it's an on-off button, and it's just completely different. And so as I say, it is a leap of faith for some people to cross into this new technology, into this new world, and we have to help them. I think as EVA England, we try to do that. So we try to work with our members to think about how we can reassure people. So one of the projects that we want to do this year is putting some users guides together for people thinking about buying an EV. How do you do it? What does it mean? What are these cars? What do the numbers mean? What does battery size mean? Because these are the simple things that people don't understand and need to understand. And it's very easy for us in the EV world to say, of course, it's so obvious, but it isn't, not if you've been used to a different world. And so simplifying it down, you're absolutely right, making sure that people understand what it is they're buying and how it works is really, really key.
Because exactly what you've just said, because we can't just assume that because we know, everybody else does.
No.
It's bringing those people on that journey with us, isn't it? And it's actually trying to see it from their point of view, and going back to where we were when we first started driving. Mine's not that long; it's kind of getting on for a couple of years now. But this was part of the reason why I started this podcast, Vicky, to be honest, because I didn't know all of this stuff. I needed to kind of get people on the podcast so I could understand it myself. And then, of course, I wanted to spread the word and make it simple for people to understand, but we have to kind of step back and go, what was it like when we first started? We can't be evangelical about this. Evangelical. We've got to actually be able to communicate this in a really simple way to people.
Absolutely, indeed. And I suppose, this might be a good segue into talking a bit about EVA England and what we want to do around that. So obviously, having come into EVA England from the policy world, it's been really, really interesting to me that I feel very much like the driver's voice is lower down the pecking order than I had expected it to be and would like it to be. And you get the sort of big kind of titans of industry sort of talking about the ZEV mandate. And the driver doesn't care particularly about the ZEV mandate. What they do care about is that they are going to be buying a car that they have never driven before and that they don't understand. And also the drivers who already have the cars care about the fact that sometimes the system, there are still tweaks that need to be made to the system to just make it a smoother driving experience for them. And as EVA England, it's our role to take that sort of voice of the driver and that view and make sure that it is being heard by policymakers in government, by kind of members of parliament who can influence that policy, and also by industry. So I think that sort of industry-facing work, just making sure that they really understand what their customers want, is also really vital. And I think as EVA England, we have to play a really big role in that, because we are the only organisation that represents the EV driver only. We're independent of any particular part of the sector, so we're an independent voice, so we can say, look, actually, this is what the driver needs and this is what the driver wants, and these are the changes and the tweaks that need to be made to help more people transition to electric, and to help those people that have already transitioned have a much easier experience, which then obviously impacts, the sort of wider view of the public of these cars.
I think that's, yeah, absolutely. You have got that ability to provide that, to the public, haven't you, really? It's just reaching that audience. And going back to that Sky News article, one of the other things was that I can't remember what the percentage was. It was probably about 7% people thought that the petrol and diesel mandate was all petrol and diesel cars, but which it isn't. It's new petrol and diesel cars.
Yeah.
So it just shows where that miscommunication and those Chinese whispers down the pub are, oh my God, we're being forced to get rid of our, vroom cars, blah, blah, and all this kind of stuff. Sorry, I'm sounding like a bloke there. I'm not meaning it. Women do this too.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, well, one of my most shocking conversations at the school gate recently was somebody saying, "Oh, what you mean? Oh, I thought it was electric cars that were being phased out in 5 years because they're not working for anyone." So the misinformation is out there, and yeah, it is really hard to kind of counter that and counter some of the headlines and make sure that clickbait doesn't get the better of what this sector actually means. Yeah.
I mean, and that's it, isn't it? If you think about it, and just as a sort of an aside, really, the media are pushing the narrative. They're pushing a narrative, but it's through clickbait titles, because actually that brings them business, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. If there's lots of people clicking, I mean, this morning, yes, I did click on that one, but actually, normally if I see something, I try not to. Because that is just pushing the fact that, either it's going to make me annoyed or it'll just make them. I'm increasing their stats, so I try and avoid it. I'd rather not.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about narrative, then what are your thoughts? So obviously, like you just said, EVA England can help push this kind of positive narrative. Where do you think we can, obviously, you're only a small organisation like my business, you're bigger in the way that you look, but there's only a few of you. So how can we, we've got kind of the kind of Electric Vehicles UK, that there's lots of organisations joined together there, but actually, what can we be doing? What do you reckon we could be doing already to sort of help this ourselves? Either kind of, if we take it a step back, right? What can EVA England do to actually get government to recognise this, that there needs to be some kind of support with this, reducing this amount of negative narrative?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting. So I think. So when I was in government, we used to have the Go Ultra Low campaign, which was a really trusted source. It was a website sponsored by what was then OLEV, but which individual companies also supported, and that was a really useful source of trusted information. However, that kind of thing wouldn't work anymore, because there are so many different companies out there, both on the car side and on the charge point side and on the energy side, that it would just become too unwieldy. So I sort of think it's not just for government anymore. I think there's more that industry as a whole collectively can do. And my biggest concern is that everyone in the sector still talks to themselves. So, it's breaking out of the sort of, I think I sort of called it the EV echo box, that
It is.
when we hold events, you rarely get anybody who's not in the EV sector turning up, and it's the same. I mean, to be honest, it's the same across the transport world. It's the same faces who come out again and again and again. And I think it's how do we break out of that? So how do we get journalists to pay more attention to us when they're writing their articles, and as you say, sort of not focus so much on the clickbait? How do we get government to perhaps coordinate and think about the messages that need to go out, and how can they play a stronger role? And that's certainly something we will be talking to government about. But I do know they're already kind of thinking about that. But it's how can they be really effective? So, how can government's messages go out, and how can they get picked up? And then I think that kind of the consumer word of mouth, I think that's still one of the most powerful, things. So when I was in government, we put together and introduced the green licence plate, and that has been, I think, one of the most successful things out there, because you have a green strip on license plate and everybody goes, oh, now you know what that, if you're an EV driver, you know what that means, and you can spot all the EVs. You get, well, I do careers talks at my daughter's school, and the thing that the children always pick up on is the green license plate, and then every time they're in the car with their parents, like, oh, mum, look, that's an EV. Oh, how do you know that? Oh, because Sophie's mum told me. So, it's that kind of word of mouth and having those visual signals, which I think is really important. So I suppose that brings me on to one of the other things that EVA England might are hoping to sort of campaign on, which is EV signage, EV charge point signage.
Oh,
so
God, yes,
please.
Yes,
You've got the green license plate on the cars. Let's have a proper strategy for EV charge point signs, because they are very few and far between. There is no clear understanding of how they're going to be rolled out. Why have we got, if we want this to be the future of transport, why are we not focusing on it? Why do we still have a sign for every petrol station, but we don't have anything for EVs? I think in our report, when we did a bit of research, there was only 13 EV charge point signs out there across the motorway network, where there is 95 motorway service stations. So we really need to work on how we're going to get EV signage rolled out, and that's definitely going to be one of our main topics of conversation with government.
and that is so needed. I mean, we need to have standardisation of signs, and and actually make sure that, because I feel that this is the other thing when people kind of go, oh, there's no EV charging in the UK. Well, there's actually thousands and thousands, but because it's not as obvious, it's not got big totems in a lot of cases like they do at petrol stations, or if you go to some places, it's not where charging isn't in the same places as we're fueling our vehicles with wet fuel, is it? And so, and they might be at the back of a car park. I'm not saying that's a good idea, but to be honest, because to me they need to be more prominent. But the signage has got to be more prominent. Let's just standardise it. And I know that's probably, and this is a question I want to ask you actually. I think that this is would be very different if EV charging was classed as critical infrastructure. It came up as a question. There was a pay-through event I went to a couple of weeks back, and there was a question that was like, right, okay, so is EV charging part of critical infrastructure? No, it's not. What would the difference be? Because you wouldn't have Highways England, it is Highways England, isn't it? Kind of stepping back and not being involved in something like this. Because if it was, you would have the narrative changing, wouldn't you?
Yeah, indeed. No, I think that's definitely a debate that I think has been running for quite a while. So it's a good point. It's like, why isn't designated critical national infrastructure? So something certainly to raise in discussions and consider. And you talked a bit before, Liz, about us being quite a small organisation, which is absolutely right.
I meant number of people that work with work. I don't mean the membership. Sorry.
No. You're absolutely right. The membership itself is a really useful. It's a really useful source of information for us, because we can go out with questions to our members on specific issues. And we can ask them what they think about things or the experiences they've had, and we also connect into other drivers' networks as well. So obviously, Women Drive Electric is, for me, a really useful network to understand what drivers are thinking. So having that reach out to these drivers' networks is really, really useful. But in terms of the sort of, as you say, that the sort of the few members of staff that we have at EVA England, I think collaboration with some of the other trade bodies is something I'm really keen on, and they are too. And so working with others where we have shared interest to think about some of these issues is something that I'm really keen to promote over the course of this year. And so things like, EV signage, I know there are a couple of other trade bodies who are really interested in that. We talked about misinformation, and you mentioned EV UK. Again, they have, whereas we sort of at the sharper end of policy and politics, they have a sort of communications expertise, and working with organisations like that to help get those messages out and try to tackle some of these barriers, I think is going to be really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Just going back to, because I put my thoughts forward without actually letting you have an answer. What do you think? Sorry, what do you think we need to have regarding signage? Like I say, I've got, as you can tell, I've got quite strong thoughts on it myself. But what would you like to see?
I mean, as a minimum, I think we ought to have EV signs where there's a petrol pump sign, like especially on the motorway network. So why you wouldn't signal your EV charge points at the same time as signalling your existing refueling stations is an interesting question, and I think that's an absolute minimum. I think obviously the same in terms of directing people. As I say, once you come off the kind of motorway network, I know there's lots of planning. Kind of, it becomes more complicated in planning permission, and is there space, and where do these signs go? But ultimately, people get close to EVs because there's this wonderful technology in their car, so they can find the charge points roughly. But you really, really need, first from a visibility point of view, for people who don't have EVs to understand that they're there. And secondly, as you say, they're often at the back of car parks, and you drive into this car park. And I think one of our members said, it's like somebody in the car always has to play spot the charger because no one can ever find it. So just having the sign that here's your EV charge point here in this car park, so where you've got parking sign. Why can't you have an EV charging sign? Because that's often where they're located. And then when you're in the charger, why can't you have one directing them to it? And I think it's that sort of, as a minimum, how do we make this user journey easier, both for current and prospective EV drivers? So that would be my kind of very simplistic view of it. But it just seems so hard sometimes. It just, planning laws seem almost impossible for people to work their way around to get just what seems like a no-brainer to the rest of us. So I think that's something we really want to try to delve into.
I love that. I think that's so important. And again, going back to that critical infrastructure thought, things might change if that's what it was deemed to be. I mean, if we're looking forward to kind of 2030, 2035, surely it's got to be, because there's got to be a level of priority. So I'd like to talk about the ZEV mandate in a minute, if that's okay. But there's got to be this prioritisation of where charging is. And that user journey has got to be part of that, and being part of the critical infrastructure of this country has to be the way forwards for everything, because we are moving from wet fuel to electric.
Yeah, absolutely.
It makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it does. It does. And there are many, I think, actually I got called up at this at a conference recently, but I, obviously being previous government, I'm perhaps more of a fan of regulation guidance than many others, especially in the industry, I expect. But I do feel that, what you're right, what you need is a framework, because every driver needs to have a good experience. And the difference about electric compared to the sort of petrol and diesel is that the charging experience is very diverse, and charging behaviour is very diverse, and no one size fits all consumers. But what you need, therefore, is a proper framework that industry can work towards, and that's across. That's across everything. So that's across kind of the existing kind of public charge point regulations, which capture very well a certain part of the EV charging market, which is the sort of the charge points that we all know. Then you've got your kind of on street. I call it the old term on street residential charging, which is those who have to charge, who don't have a driveway, who therefore need access to cheaper charging.
Yes.
And that's a different set of charging, and there are many solutions to that. So there are the pop-up chargers, there's the cross-pavement solutions, there's different types of tariff, but that market is not going to develop quickly if it doesn't have some guidance and a framework around it to push it along. And we've already seen some of the issues around the cross-pavement solution, where it's just people want them now, yet the market and the standards and the guidance and the planning laws are just not there yet. So that's a sort of, we need to be on the front foot on some of these frameworks. Signage is obviously another one, which is no brainer. And then I guess the other one that I don't think gets talked about enough is the really important PAS standard work, which is access for to chargers for people with disabilities. So that's really crucial, and there's a lot of really good work going on there, but it's really difficult. And what we all need to do is sort of pull together and help develop a standard that everyone can meet, and then get that standard refined over time to make sure it is appropriate for everyone, and it can be rolled out to a timetable. And I think that those sort of frameworks, I sort of feel like we really need to get on the front foot with those frameworks, because as more and more people transition to EVs, these smaller issues crop up. So when we survey our EV drivers, they're not talking about range anxiety at all. That's not what an EV driver experiences anymore. Those in the know are talking about cost of charging, access to chargers, not being able to get access to their home tariff because they don't have a driveway. Those are the issues that, not being able to access a charge point if they have a disability. And those are the issues that we do really need to sort of be on top of.
And actually, this is all about, you're just saying it's about the word inclusion, isn't it?
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
We need to bring everyone on this journey, like you said, about creating or developing standards, but making sure that those standards are not open to interpretation, because I don't know about you, but you can tell me about your thoughts on ZEV and PAS and things like that. But if you leave things open to interpretation, it is just that.
Yeah, it gets
everybody
confusing.
everybody will just interpret it the way that they think is right.
Yeah, and that's bad for the consumer. So I come back to this. I think it's not good for the consumer to not have trust and confidence in the product that they're buying or in the way that it works. And I think that's where these frameworks are really important. And I think that often, as I say, that driver's voice, the consumer's rights, often take a slight step kind of down the ladder to some of these other issues. And I think we were talking about battery health recently, so it's really important, battery health, some way of testing battery health, because that's what consumers worry about when they buy a second-hand EV.
Exactly.
But just waiting for the UN standard that's going through at the moment, which I don't know how long it's going to take, and sort of had a few conversations with a few people, but just waiting for that probably isn't good enough right now, because we're only 5 years away from the 2030 date. People are interested in buying these cars, but as all the kind of surveys coming out say, they're just not quite ready to take that leap of faith. Accessing the second-hand market is absolutely critical for that. So just what can we do in the meantime? So how can we help consumers understand what it is they're buying and have confidence in it is something that I think gets a little bit lost in the debates around the ZEV mandate, which we as we can talk about in a second. But the ZEV mandate itself isn't what worries me as a consumer, as the head of a consumer organisation.
I was going to say, actually, just going back to what you said about consumers and the pecking order, I totally agree there. But, and I don't know why, as in why is it that the person who is buying that service at the end is not being prioritised, because we would do everywhere else, wouldn't we?
Yeah.
We're talking about any other consumer experience. You remember the phrase, the customer's always right. I mean, we're not always, but it's about that level of prioritisation, isn't it? And I don't get it. I think in some ways, especially maybe on the charging side, there seems to be a real push for, we've got to get chargers in the ground. Get it. I totally get it. And there's some charge point operators that are doing fantastic jobs. What I would say is that there are issues with, we need to make sure that we fulfil the investment requirements,
Yeah.
But the end product is utilisation. And actually, if you're not prioritising those customer needs, how are you going to get utilisation?
And I think it's
because you're going to give them a product they don't like.
Yeah, I think for us, that's why the ZEV mandate consultation was really important, not because of the target. So the ZEV mandate targets, I think, in my mind, they were brought in under regulation. I think it was about over a year, just over a year ago. There was a wobble in the autumn, but I felt like government quite quickly came out and said, no, that the targets are going to stay. What we want to talk to you about is that cost of the transition. So making sure that it is affordable, I think, for industry and for kind of consumers. And for us, it's absolutely important that the targets stay, because we've talked about consumer confusion. So, having a really clear mandate and being really clear following this ZEV mandate consultation that this is where we're headed and that's here to stay is really important. And I think that got lost in the discussions around quite technical aspects of the ZEV mandate, which are things like flexibilities for car manufacturers and their kind of trading credits, so which are about easing the cost for the car manufacturing industry, but they still have to, as a whole, the industry still has to meet those targets. And then the other question is around, what cars are going to be included in that period from 2030 to 2035, which had never been set. And so that was about what the consultation was. And I think all of that got completely confused and lost in the media debate and various different things coming out from industry and government. And none of that is helpful, because then, as you say, the customer's just like, I don't understand what's going on. Are these cars good? Am I supposed to buy them or am I not? And I think as a whole, the industry needs to remember that we need to create that confidence in the market. But for us, what the ZEV mandate consultation opened up, it had one question in it which was about demand measures, which is basically how to reduce costs for the transition, including for the consumer. And that was the question that we as an organisation honed in on, and we sort of presented a bit of a menu to government of the various different things that the consumer worries about at the moment. So we did a survey of, as I've said, sort of drivers, and both our members and the wider driving community. We had around 450 responses, which was pretty good for a 2-week survey, which gave us some really clear feedback, which is one, misinformation, which we've talked about, which is a barrier. The upfront cost is still a barrier to those who have not yet made the jump to EVs, because money talks. So things like the salary sacrifice scheme, the benefit in kind scheme have been really instrumental in persuading people to go electric in the first place, because it's makes economic sense to them. So making sure that those sort of the things that are working to reduce upfront cost and put people into EVs are still there. And then the other thing, and also we talk a bit about the second-hand market, like access to that lower cost EV market, like when the price is right. Yes. People buy the cars, and that's been shown very well by France has a social leasing model, which is targeted at lower cost EVs for lower income families, and it when it was launched, it sold out in 6 weeks. Like it was, so when the price is right, people will
exactly.
Tackling that and making sure that the price is right is really key. And then on the charging side, it was the cost of charging. So that kind of making sure that those who don't have a driveway have access to the cheaper tariffs that those who have a driveway are able to access. And then accessibility, which is where we talk about kind of the importance of the PAS standard work, the importance of signage. And we also talked about a sort of perhaps another not talked about option, which is the fact that tenants have no right to charge at the moment. So if you're in a tenancy, if you're in a rental property and you ask your landlord for a charge point, they can just say no. So sort of just thinking about through some of those little things that help that consumer confidence. And for us, that's why that ZEV mandate consultation was important, because it was a unique opportunity to give government an insight into all of the things that drivers actually are worrying about at the moment, and offer some solutions to tackling them. And that's how we use the ZEV mandate consultation process.
So when do we know I'm assuming there's a timeline on the kind of the responses to the, obviously, there was a timeline to get the responses in. That's happened now, isn't it? But what is is there a timeline for government to come back and say, this is what it looks like now, this is what we're responding back to you, industry?
Yeah, so there is a formal, they do have to formally respond to the consultation, and I think it's, actually, to be honest, I can't remember now if it's 2 or 3 months, such as my sort of ageing brain, where they will have to put a formal response. However, there are some fiscal events which I sort of was hoping, we might see some movement on. So obviously we've got the budget, we've got the spending review coming up in the summer, and then you've got presumably an autumn statement again sort of late autumn. So there are some events where things can happen sort of outside of that timeline, and on the kind of on the financial side, so on that sort of, you know, salary sacrifice, we called for a couple of kind of tax exemptions as well. You know, we would hope to get decisions on that out of those fiscal events. And then I guess the regulatory stuff, then yes, it would be really wonderful if there was some signalling that this work is going to go on. So, you know, things around signage are going to happen. The PAS standard, obviously, we're sort of, you know, we'd like to see, you know, greater impetus and movement on that, and a bit more momentum around that. And then things like, you know, have we got the right sort of structures in place for some of the existing funds and regulations? So that stuff I'd hope they would respond to in their formal response. And obviously we'll keep prodding. But then, there's other stuff we can do. So as I say, we can work with industry. We can think about how this could best be done. We can help, you know, industry can voluntarily pull together to create their own sort of standards. And it's just, is there more that we could do as a sector to help chivvy this along? You know, because government is a slow moving beast, because it's hard to, you know, you have several involved departments, and having been on the inside, it's hard to get agreement on everything really, you know, it just takes time, and they have to think about the impacts and on the kind of the full sector, and that sort of analysis takes more time, but whereas we can perhaps be a bit more nimble and move a bit quicker on some of these issues. And so it would be, I'm really keen on having that conversation with some industry kind of partners in the sector on what can we do ourselves to keep this ticking and moving more quickly.
It's like lots of plates spinning all at the same time,
Yeah.
isn't it? And actually, I'm going to ask you a final question then, because I know you've got a dash soon. So, what do you see as the kind of what are the main priorities? I know we've just talked about this, but what does the next 6 to 12 months look like for you as an organisation, and you as a person? Obviously, getting into the role of CEO doesn't take 2 seconds. You know, it's a longer process, isn't it? What does it look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, the getting into the role of CEO and running the organisation is, having sort of spent the first 2 months focusing on the ZEV mandate consultation, but is a priority. But in terms of, I think we would like to use our response as a platform for, I'd say, campaigns of some of the things that we think are most pertinent at the moment. So one is this cost of charging, the charging divide, as we call it. I've heard it called the pavement tax.
Yeah.
So that's sort of helping people access home energy tariffs. And how can we best do that? So we'd like to dig a little bit deeper into that and look at what's driving those high public charging costs that are out there on the network at the moment, what's already going on to bring them down, because I think a lot of it is linked to electricity markets and kind of, again, sort of slower moving beasts, but then also kind of what else could be done, you know, especially with local authorities to help kind of solve that for the consumer. PAS standard is going to be a really kind of important kind of piece of work for us as well, and we'll be kind of working with our members on helping get some momentum behind that, and thinking about how to get kind of the standard kind of rolled out in the way that it should be. So that's going to be really important for us as well. And then I think the third one is, we've talked about the second-hand market, but I think a little bit more of a push there is needed. So, you know, we know that other countries have done some really interesting stuff around that. We know that when the price is right, consumers would leap to these vehicles. So how do we help particularly lower income households access the lower cost EVs, either lower cost new or used EVs, but what are the structures that we can put in place? And there are some big opportunities there. We've got the National Wealth Fund, which is sort of a ring fence fund. You know, we sort of proposed in our consultation response, how could you make use of that to do some kind of loan guarantee or social leasing scheme? So I think there's some work to be done there, perhaps to try and push some ideas in the right direction, and, you know, hope that we might change some thinking around that. And I think that's sort of three that I've got in my head, of sort of, as I say, using some of the platform that we've created with our ZEV mandate response to perhaps hone a bit deeper into some of these issues and try and get some movement on them.
I was gonna say, you are gonna be one busy lady. You are, aren't you? Really gonna be one busy lady. I think what EVA England are doing, and yourself and the team, you know, like I say, because you know, it's a small team, but actually the reach that you've got through the membership is amazing, and you know, and actually just look at it from the driver's point of view, which makes such a difference. So I just want to say, keep doing what you're doing, Vicky. I think it's fantastic. You
Thank
know,
you.
I know it's not easy, and you sometimes it's a bit of an uphill battle to kind of get through things, isn't it? But it's just keep doing it, because and we're all trying to do our bit. I know that, but just keep doing what you're doing. And just to say thank you, it's
Yeah.
been a joy talking to you today,
Thank you. Thank
and
you.
so lovely to kind of hear it from you about what's going on, and Zev and everything else. And sorry that I got on my orange box a little bit about things.
Good idea. That's a way.
We're both
Thank
very passionate, you can tell,
Yeah. Yeah.
and people know who've been listening and watching this podcast, listening to and watching it for some time, that's the kind of person that I am, because I just want EV adoption to work,
Yes, indeed.
as well as the
Indeed.
rest of the decarbonisation of, it's not just about transport, it's decarbonisation of heat and everything. So we need to do this,
Yeah.
and we all need to kind of try and do our bit, and just having those incentives and pushing this narrative is fantastic. So thank you, Vicky. I really,
Thank you
really
very much,
appreciate your
Liz.
time.
Thank
So
you.
to everybody listening and watching, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. She's an absolutely wonderful person. I can tell you that. We've not even met face to face yet. There will be time.
Yeah.
Just if you can push this podcast and share it, like, subscribe, all of the wonderful things that I always ask you at the end of this, I would really appreciate it. We're on across a lot of social media channels, we're especially on LinkedIn. So if you see our posts, just please comment and give us some feedback about what you thought about the episode. And if you've got any suggestions about people to bring on, let me know. So on that note, Vicky, I'm going to say thank you very much. Again, it's been wonderful. And to everyone else watching and listening, I'm going to say goodbye. Thank you for watching Electric Evolution. I really love bringing you these weekly conversations about sustainability, renewables, and building a cleaner future together. If you're passionate about positive change, please like, subscribe, and share with others who also care about these topics. You can also download our white paper, Plugging into the Future, at fullcircleci.co.uk and join the discussion on improving sustainable transport, or email me at liz@fullcircleci.co.uk. Thanks for watching. Bye.